I sold my house to cure my husband's cancer. When he recovered, he left me for a younger woman. My son and my business partners laughed at me. I spent a cold night under a storm when I saw a scared little girl shivering from the cold. I used my last $10 to buy her food and a blanket. 3 days later, 17 black cars stopped in front of the shelter. When a billionaire stepped out of the car and saw his daughter with me, he did something that changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Gretchen, and at 65 years old, I learned that love can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. I was arranging fresh flowers in the antique shop I'd built from nothing over 30 years when my phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Martinez, and the words he spoke changed everything. Mrs. Gretchen, I need you and your husband to come in immediately. The test results are back. My hands trembled as I set down the white roses I'd been holding. Damon had been complaining about fatigue for months, but we'd both attributed it to his age. He was 68 after all. Men his age were supposed to slow down. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. I watched my husband of 42 years crumble in that sterile office chair, his weathered hands covering his face as Dr. Martinez explained treatment options. The words blurred together: chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. But one phrase cut through everything else. We're looking at approximately $250,000 for the full treatment protocol. That night, Damon couldn't sleep. I found him in our kitchen at 3 a.m, staring out the window at our small backyard garden. I can't put you through this, he whispered without turning around. Maybe it's my time, Gretchen. Maybe I should just... I wrapped my arms around him from behind, feeling how much weight he'd already lost. Don't you dare talk like that. We're going to fight this together. Our insurance would cover maybe 60% of the costs. The rest would have to come from somewhere else. I knew where. The antique shop was my life's work. I'd started it in 1982 with $300 and a dream, working 18-hour days to build it into something special. The old Victorian house I'd converted sat on prime real estate downtown, filled with carefully curated pieces I'd collected over decades. It was worth nearly $400,000. Our house was paid off, worth another $200,000 in the current market. Between the two properties, we could cover Damon's treatment and have enough left over to rent a small apartment while he recovered. I made the decision without telling him. The next morning, I called a realtor. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Patterson?" Janet, my realtor, asked when I explained what I wanted to do. "These are major assets. Once you sell, there's no going back." I looked at Damon sleeping fitfully on our couch, his face gaunt and pale. "I'm sure." The process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of watching Damon grow weaker while I quietly dismantled our life. I sold the shop to a developer who planned to tear it down for condos. The house went to a young couple with 3 children who promised to take care of my rose garden. I moved us into a small apartment across town and threw myself into being Damon's caregiver. Every morning, I drove him to treatments. Every evening, I held his head while he was sick. I learned to cook foods that wouldn't upset his stomach, to give injections, to monitor his medication schedule with military precision. For 8 months, cancer became our entire world. But it worked. In November, Dr. Martinez used the word we'd been praying for: remission. Damon looked better than he had in a year. His color returned, his appetite came back, and he started talking about the future again. I thought we'd won. I was so naive. The conversation that shattered my world happened on a Wednesday evening in December. I was making Damon's favorite soup when he cleared his throat behind me. "Gretchen, we need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach drop, but I kept stirring. "What about?" "I've been thinking a lot during this whole ordeal. About life, about what I want." I turned around, soup spoon still in my hand. Damon was sitting at our small table, his hands folded, looking anywhere but at me. "I want a divorce." The spoon clattered to the floor. "What?" "I know this is difficult, but I've realized that I want to spend whatever time I have left being truly happy. Haven't we been happy? My voice sounded strange, distant. I thought, after beating the cancer together. Damon finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before: indifference. Gretchen, you're a good woman, but we've been living like roommates for years. I want passion. I want to feel alive again. Feel alive again? I repeated. I sold everything to save your life. I spent 8 months taking care of you. I gave up my business, my home, everything I built. I never asked you to do that. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. You never asked me? You're my husband. Of course I did it. Well, now I'm asking for my freedom. That's when I understood. This wasn't a sudden decision born from surviving cancer. This was planned. There's someone else, isn't there? Damon's silence was answer enough. Who is she? Her name is Sarah. She was one of my nurses during treatment. I felt like I was falling down a deep well. Sarah. I remembered her. Pretty, blonde, maybe 32 or 33. She'd always been extra attentive to Damon, always smiling and laughing at his jokes. I'd thought she was just being professional. How long? I whispered. Does it matter? How long, Damon? He sighed. Since July. July, right in the middle of his treatment. While I was selling my life's work to pay for his care, he was falling in love with another woman. I want you out by the end of the month, he said, standing up. I'll give you 30 days to find somewhere else to live. This is my apartment too. I'm the one who rented it. My name is on the lease. Sarah will be moving in after the holidays. It would be awkward for all of us if you stayed. I stared at this man I'd loved for 42 years, this man I'd sacrificed everything to save, and I didn't recognize him. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have any money. I spent everything on your treatment. That's not my problem anymore, Gretchen. The next week was a nightmare. I called our son Robert, thinking surely he would understand. Surely he would be outraged by his father's behavior. Mom, I think you need to accept that Dad has the right to be happy, he said when I explained what was happening. You two haven't been in love for years. Everyone could see that. Robert, I gave up everything to save his life. And that was your choice. But you can't hold that over his head forever. I'm not holding anything over his head. I'm just trying to understand how you can support this. Robert sighed, sounding irritated. Look, Mom, you've always been dramatic. Dad told me how you've been guilt-tripping him about the money. Sarah makes him happy in a way you haven't for years. He told you about Sarah? Of course he did. He's been miserable, Mom. Give him a break. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. My own son was taking his father's side, painting me as the villain in this story. But the worst was yet to come. I had hoped to keep my partnership in Patterson and Associates, the consulting business I'd built with 2 other women before opening the antique shop. It wasn't much, but it would give me a small income while I figured out what to do next. Margaret and Susan called me into the office 2 days after New Year's. Gretchen, we've been discussing your situation, Margaret said, not meeting my eyes. Given everything you're going through personally, we think it might be best if you stepped back from the business. Stepped back? I repeated. I helped found this company. Susan leaned forward, her expression falsely sympathetic. We're concerned about your emotional state. The divorce, the financial stress, it's affecting your judgment. What are you talking about? I've been working here for 20 years. You missed 3 client meetings last month, Margaret said. You seemed distracted, unfocused. I was dealing with my husband's cancer treatment and then a divorce. Of course I was distracted. Exactly our point, Susan said. We think you need time to get your personal life sorted out. We're prepared to buy out your partnership stake. They offered me $15,000 for a partnership worth at least $40,000. I knew they were taking advantage of my situation, but I also knew I didn't have the energy or resources to fight them. By February 1st, I had lost my husband, my son's respect, my home, my business, and my life savings. I was 65 years old with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The homeless shelter on Maple Street became my temporary address. The social worker who processed my intake form was kind, but overworked. It's just until you get back on your feet, she assured me, handing me a list of rules and mealtimes. Most people don't stay long. But as I lay in my narrow cot that first night, listening to the sounds of 30 other women trying to sleep in one room, I wondered if this was how my story would end. Alone, forgotten, discarded by the very people I'd sacrificed everything for. The woman in the cot next to mine was snoring softly. Across the room, someone was crying quietly into their pillow. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, and I pulled my thin blanket up to my chin. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about Damon and Sarah in the apartment I'd paid for, sleeping in the bed I'd bought, building a life on the ashes of mine. Tomorrow would mark exactly 2 months since my husband had asked for a divorce. 2 months since my world had collapsed. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that everything was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. 3 weeks at the shelter had taught me things I never imagined I'd need to know. How to make instant coffee taste almost decent by adding a pinch of salt. How to fold clothes so they'd fit in a plastic bag. How to disappear into yourself when the woman 2 beds over started screaming about invisible enemies at 3 in the morning. Most importantly, I learned that dignity was something you had to fight for every single day. The morning of the storm started like any other. I woke at 5:30, before the breakfast bell, and made my way to the communal bathroom. The mirror above the sink showed a woman I barely recognized. My hair, once my pride, now hung limp and gray around a face that had aged years in just months. The shelter provided basic toiletries, but there was only so much you could do with generic shampoo and a bar of institutional soap. I'd been looking for work for 2 weeks, but at 65, most employers saw me as a liability rather than an asset. The few interviews I'd managed to secure always ended the same way. "We'll be in touch," they'd say with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. That morning, I had $7.34 left from the small amount I'd managed to save from selling my jewelry. It was all that stood between me and absolute destitution. The weather forecast had been ominous all week. The meteorologists were calling it a significant weather event, the kind of storm that could knock out power for days and turn streets into rivers. By noon, the shelter staff were already making preparations, checking generators and stocking extra food. "All residents should plan to remain inside tonight," announced Mrs. Chen, the day manager. "This storm is going to be dangerous." But at 4:30 that afternoon, I realized I'd made a critical mistake. In my distraction over a job interview that morning, I'd forgotten to take my blood pressure medication. Without it, I risked a stroke or heart attack. The pills were sitting in my small bag upstairs, but I needed food to take them safely, and dinner wouldn't be served until 6. I counted my money again. $7.34, enough for a small sandwich and maybe a carton of milk from the corner store 3 blocks away. The wind was already picking up as I stepped outside, pushing against me with surprising force. Dark clouds churned overhead, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and hurried down the street. The corner store was nearly empty except for the elderly clerk and a man buying cigarettes. I grabbed a pre-made turkey sandwich and a small carton of milk, calculating the exact cost in my head. $4.67. That would leave me with $2.67 for tomorrow. As I paid, the clerk glanced outside nervously. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "You should get home quick." Home. I nodded and tucked my purchases into my jacket. The walk back to the shelter would take about 15 minutes if I hurried. But I never made it. Halfway there, the sky opened up. Not the gentle rain that had been threatening all day, but a torrential downpour that soaked through my jacket in seconds. The wind turned vicious, whipping debris down the street and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I ducked into a doorway to wait it out, but the storm only got worse. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder so loud it made my teeth ache. This wasn't a storm that would pass in a few minutes. This was the kind of weather that could kill you if you weren't careful. That's when I heard it. A sound that cut through the howling wind and driving rain. Crying. Not the wailing of the storm, but human crying. A child crying. I peered out into the rain, trying to locate the source. There, huddled behind a row of garbage cans in the alley beside a closed restaurant, was a small figure. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, soaked to the skin and shivering violently. I didn't think. I ran. "Honey!" I called out, my voice barely audible over the storm. "Honey, what are you doing out here?" The child looked up at me with enormous brown eyes filled with terror. She was small for her age, with tangled dark hair plastered to her head and clothes that had once been expensive but were now torn and muddy. "I'm lost," she whispered, teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. "I can't find my daddy." "Oh, sweetheart." I knelt down beside her, not caring that the water from the alley immediately soaked through my pants. "How long have you been out here?" Since this morning, I think. Maybe yesterday? I don't know. My heart broke. This tiny thing had been alone in the storm for hours, maybe longer. "What's your name?" "Charlotte," she managed between chatters. "Charlotte Elizabeth." "Well, Charlotte Elizabeth, I'm Gretchen, and we need to get you somewhere safe right now." But as I looked around, I realized our options were limited. The restaurant behind us was closed, its metal security gate pulled down tight. The other buildings on this block were mostly offices, equally shuttered. The shelter was still 6 blocks away, and there was no way this little girl could make that walk in this weather. Then I remembered the 24-hour convenience store we'd passed. It wasn't ideal, but it would be warm and dry. "Can you walk?" I asked Charlotte. She nodded, though I could see she was exhausted and probably in mild shock. I took off my jacket, wrapping it around her small shoulders even though it left me in just a thin sweater. "Hold on to me," I told her. "Don't let go, no matter what." The 3 blocks to the convenience store felt like 3 miles. The wind kept trying to knock us down, and the rain came in sheets so thick we could barely see. I kept one arm around Charlotte and used the other to guide us along storefronts and parked cars. By the time we stumbled through the store's doors, we were both soaked and shaking. The clerk, a different one from earlier, looked up from his magazine with concern. "Jesus, lady, you shouldn't be out in this with a kid." "I know," I said, water dripping from my hair. "We got caught in it." The store was wonderfully warm, with fluorescent lights that seemed impossibly bright after the dark storm outside. Charlotte stayed pressed against my side, her small hand gripping my sweater. I looked around the store, calculating. I had $2.67 left. Charlotte needed dry clothes, or at least something to help warm her up. She needed food. She probably needed medical attention, but that would have to wait until the storm passed. In the clothing section, I found the cheapest options. A child's t-shirt with a cartoon character for $3.99, and a small package of socks for $2.50. Both were too expensive for my budget, but I couldn't leave this child in wet clothes. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I approached the clerk with the t-shirt, socks, a small bag of cookies, and a bottle of water. "How much for all of this?" He rang it up. $9.47. I had $2.67, but in my other pocket, I had something else. The emergency $20 bill I'd hidden away weeks ago, my last safety net. Money I'd sworn to save for a true emergency. Looking at Charlotte, blue-lipped and shivering, I knew this qualified. "Here," I said, pulling out the 20. The clerk handed me my change, $10.53. Combined with what I already had, it left me with $13.20 total, more than I'd had all day. In the store's small bathroom, I helped Charlotte change into the dry shirt. Her clothes underneath were soaked, but at least the outer layer was warm now. I used paper towels to dry her hair as much as possible and helped her put on the clean socks. "Better?" I asked. She nodded, and for the first time since I'd found her, she smiled slightly. "Thank you." We settled in a corner of the store with the cookies and water. Charlotte ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which made me wonder exactly how long she'd been missing. "Charlotte, where do you live?" I asked gently. "In a big house," she said around a mouthful of cookie, "with lots of windows and a big yard. Do you remember your address?" She shook her head. "Daddy says I'm not supposed to tell strangers where I live." Smart girl and smart father, but it made finding her family more complicated. "What about your daddy's name? His full name?" Marcus, she said immediately. Marcus Wellington. The name meant nothing to me, but I filed it away. Does your daddy have a phone number you remember? Again, she shook her head. I'm not supposed to remember numbers either, but I was at school, and then there were these men. Her voice trailed off, and I saw fear creep back into her eyes. What men, honey? They said they knew my daddy. They said I had to come with them. But they were mean and they scared me, so I ran away. My blood went cold. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something much more serious. Charlotte, when did this happen? When did the men try to take you? 3 days ago? Maybe 4? I've been hiding ever since. 3 or 4 days. This little girl had been surviving on the streets for nearly a week, hiding from what sounded like kidnappers. How had no one found her? How had there been no Amber Alerts, no police search? Unless there had been, and I just hadn't seen them. Living in the shelter, I didn't have regular access to news or social media. We need to call the police, I told her gently. Charlotte's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She grabbed my arm with both hands, her eyes wide with panic. No, no police. The men said if I called the police, they'd hurt my daddy. Sweetheart, the police are the good guys. They help find lost children. No, she said again, tears starting to flow. Please don't call them. Please. I held her as she cried, feeling her tiny body shake with fear. Whatever had happened to her, whatever those men had told her, she was genuinely terrified of involving the authorities. The storm raged on outside. Through the store windows, I could see trees bending nearly horizontal in the wind. Power lines sparked and swayed dangerously. This was no ordinary storm. Okay, I said finally, no police tonight. But Charlotte, we have to find your daddy somehow. She nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. He's probably looking for me. I'm sure he is. We spent the next 4 hours in that convenience store. The clerk, whose name was Danny, turned out to be kind-hearted beneath his gruff exterior. When he realized what was happening, he stopped charging me for the hot chocolate from the machine and let us stay as long as we needed. Storm like this, nobody should be out there, he said. You can wait here until it passes. Around midnight, the worst of the weather finally moved through. The rain diminished to a steady drizzle, and the wind died down enough that we could hear ourselves think. We should try to find a safe place for you to sleep, I told Charlotte. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to find your daddy. But where could we go? I couldn't bring her to the shelter. They had strict policies about children. And besides, it wasn't safe for a little girl there. Hotels were out of the question with my limited funds. I know a place, Charlotte said quietly. There's a park not far from here. It has a gazebo with a roof. The idea of spending the night in a park with a child made my stomach turn. But what choice did we have? As we prepared to leave the store, Danny called out to us. Hey, wait. He walked over with a plastic bag. Take these, he said, handing me the bag. Inside were granola bars, bottled water, and a small blanket from the store's camping section. I can't pay for these, I told him. Didn't ask you to, he replied. Kid needs to eat. Outside, the air was clean and cool after the storm. Debris littered the streets, tree branches, scattered garbage, broken glass. But the worst had passed. Charlotte led me through several blocks to a small neighborhood park. The gazebo she'd mentioned was old but sturdy, with a solid roof and partial walls that would provide some protection from the wind. I spread out the blanket and we huddled together. Charlotte curled up against my side like a small cat seeking warmth. Gretchen? She said softly in the darkness. Yes, sweetheart? Are you my guardian angel? The question caught me off guard. Here I was, a homeless woman with $13 to my name, and this precious child saw me as her protector. I'm just someone who cares about you, I said. Daddy always said that guardian angels come when you need them most. I held her tighter, this beautiful, brave little girl who'd been through so much. Well then, maybe I am. As Charlotte's breathing evened out in sleep, I stared up at the gazebo ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. I had no idea that in less than 72 hours, 17 black cars would pull up outside the shelter, and my life would change in ways I could never have imagined. 3 days passed in a blur of careful survival and growing attachment. Charlotte and I had established a routine of sorts. Mornings at the convenience store where Danny let us use the bathroom and buy minimal supplies, afternoons in the park when weather permitted, and nights back at the gazebo, or sometimes in the 24-hour laundromat when it got too cold. I was amazed by Charlotte's resilience. Despite everything she'd been through, she maintained a sunny disposition most of the time. She told me stories about her life, fragments that painted a picture of wealth and privilege I could barely imagine. A house with 12 bedrooms, a swimming pool shaped like a butterfly, horses in a stable behind the main residence. "Daddy travels a lot for work," she explained as we shared a bag of crackers on our third morning together. "Sometimes I don't see him for weeks, but when he comes home, we have tea parties in the garden." "What kind of work does your daddy do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure she'd understand the answer even if she knew it. "He makes things happen," Charlotte said seriously. "Important things. That's why the bad men wanted to take me, to make him do what they wanted." The more she talked, the more convinced I became that her father was someone significant. Wealthy enough to be a kidnapping target, important enough that professional criminals would risk taking his child. But if that was true, why hadn't I seen any news coverage? Why weren't there search parties, police alerts, FBI involvement? On Tuesday afternoon, as we sat in the park watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs I'd bought with my dwindling funds, Charlotte suddenly grabbed my arm. "Gretchen," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "That car, it's been there before." I followed her gaze to a black sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, and it had been there for about 20 minutes. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Charlotte nodded, pressing closer to me. "Yesterday, when we were at the store, and the day before, near the gazebo." My heart rate spiked. If someone was watching us, if the kidnappers had found Charlotte again, we were in serious danger. A 65-year-old woman and a small child were no match for professional criminals. "We're going to walk away very calmly," I told her quietly. "Just like we're going somewhere normal. Don't look back at the car." We gathered our few belongings and started walking deeper into the park, toward the tree line where we could disappear if necessary. Behind us, I heard a car door slam. "They're following us," Charlotte whimpered. I picked up our pace, my mind racing. There was a shopping center about 6 blocks away, lots of people and security cameras, if we could make it there. "Excuse me." The voice behind us was male, authoritative. I didn't turn around. "Ma'am, please stop." I grabbed Charlotte's hand and started running. She kept up surprisingly well for such a small child, but I could hear footsteps gaining on us. "We're not going to hurt you." Right, that's what they all said. We made it maybe 2 blocks before a second black car appeared at the intersection ahead of us. Then a third came from our left. We were surrounded. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles. Not the rough criminals I'd expected, but professionals in expensive clothes with earpieces and the kind of bearing that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. I pulled Charlotte behind me, my heart hammering. "Stay back," I shouted. "I've called the police." It was a lie, but maybe they'd believe it. One of the men, older than the others with graying hair and kind eyes, stepped forward with his hands visible. "Mrs. Ma'am, my name is Agent Richards. We're not here to harm anyone. We're looking for Charlotte Wellington." Charlotte's grip on my hand tightened. "Is that your last name, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. But they might be lying. The bad men could be pretending. Agent Richards seemed to understand her fear. "Charlotte, honey, do you remember the song your daddy used to sing to you when you couldn't sleep? The one about the mockingbird?" Charlotte's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because your daddy told me. He's been looking for you for 6 days, sweetheart. He's very worried." "Daddy's really looking for me?" "He is, and he's right here." Richard spoke into his earpiece, and moments later, the most expensive car I'd ever seen pulled up to the curb. Not just expensive, extraordinary. A Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than I'd made in 5 years. The man who stepped out took my breath away. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with dark hair silvered at the temples and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and everything about him screamed power and wealth. But when he saw Charlotte, all of that fell away. "Charlotte! Daddy!" She broke away from me and ran to him, launching herself into his arms. He caught her and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, his face buried in her hair as his shoulders shook with emotion. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank God you're safe." I stood there watching this reunion, suddenly acutely aware of my own appearance. My hair was unwashed, my clothes were the same ones I'd been wearing for 3 days, and I probably smelled like the laundromat where we'd spent last night. After several minutes, the man, Charlotte's father, set her down but kept one hand on her shoulder as he looked at me. "You're the woman who's been taking care of my daughter." It wasn't a question. His eyes were studying me intently, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through to my soul. Yes, I found her during the storm. She was scared and alone. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intensity of his presence. Agent Richards told me what his team observed. "You've been protecting her for 3 days, feeding her, keeping her safe, staying with her." I nodded, not sure what else to say. "What's your name?" "Gretchen. Gretchen Patterson." "Gretchen Patterson." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. "My name is Marcus Wellington." The name still didn't mean anything to me, but clearly it should have. Agent Richards and the other men were watching our interaction with the kind of attention reserved for significant moments. "Charlotte told me what you did for her," Marcus continued. "How you spent your last money to buy her dry clothes and food. How you protected her from the people she was afraid of. Any decent person would have done the same thing." Something shifted in his expression. "No, Gretchen. Most people would have called the authorities immediately and gone on with their lives. You made yourself responsible for a stranger's child." Charlotte tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, Gretchen doesn't have a home. She's been sleeping outside with me." Marcus's attention sharpened. "You're homeless?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "It's temporary. I'm getting back on my feet." "Why?" The question was direct, almost blunt. I wasn't sure how to answer without explaining my entire story. "Life circumstances," I said finally. Marcus studied me for another long moment, then spoke to Agent Richards. "I want a full background check within 2 hours. Everything. Financial history, criminal record, medical records, employment history, family situation, everything." "Sir, that's not really necessary." "It's very necessary." Marcus's tone brooked no argument. "This woman has been caring for my daughter for 3 days. I need to know who she is." I felt a flash of indignation. "I don't need your investigation. I'm not asking for anything from you." "Maybe not," Marcus said, "but I'm asking something from you." "What?" "I'd like you to come with us. Charlotte doesn't want to let you out of her sight, and frankly, neither do I. At least until I can properly thank you for what you've done." Charlotte immediately grabbed my hand. "Please, Gretchen, don't leave me." "Sweetheart, you're safe now. You're with your daddy. But I want you to come too. Please." I looked between Charlotte's pleading face and her father's unreadable expression. "I don't think that's appropriate. You have your daughter back. That's what matters." "Get in the car, Gretchen." It wasn't a request. Marcus Wellington might have been grateful, but he was clearly a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I'd rather not." "I'm afraid I have to insist." Agent Richards stepped closer. "Ma'am, Mr. Wellington just wants to ensure your safety. You've been exposed to a dangerous situation by helping Charlotte. Until we're certain the threat has been neutralized, you could be at risk." That possibility hadn't occurred to me. If the kidnappers had been watching us, if they'd seen me with Charlotte, I might indeed be in danger. "For how long?" 24 hours, Marcus said. "Give me 24 hours to debrief Charlotte, deal with the security situation, and figure out how to properly thank you. Then, if you want to leave, you're free to go." Charlotte was still holding my hand, looking up at me with those enormous brown eyes. "Please, Gretchen. I'm scared without you, and that decided it. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Leather seats softer than most beds, climate control that made the air feel like a gentle spring breeze, and enough space that Charlotte and I could sit comfortably while Marcus sat across from us. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe," Marcus replied, but he was looking at Charlotte, not me. "Baby girl, I need you to tell me everything that happened, starting with the day you disappeared." Charlotte launched into her story, and as she talked, I began to understand the scope of what had occurred. She'd been taken from her private school by two men claiming to be friends of her father. They'd held her in an abandoned warehouse for 2 days, waiting for Marcus to comply with some demand they'd made. "What did they want from you?" I asked Marcus. His jaw tightened. "Access to certain government contracts, information that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the right people." "And you refused?" "I couldn't give them what they wanted even if I'd wanted to. The information doesn't exist in the way they thought it did. So, they just kept Charlotte? They were waiting for me to change my mind. What they didn't count on was Charlotte being resourceful enough to escape." I looked at the little girl with new respect. She'd not only escaped professional kidnappers, but had survived on the streets for nearly a week. "How did you get away, sweetheart?" "They left me alone for a few minutes," Charlotte said. "The rope wasn't tied very tight, and there was a loose board in the wall. I wiggled through and ran." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and I could see the pain on his face as he imagined his daughter in that situation. The car turned through massive iron gates, and I got my first glimpse of the Wellington estate. Calling it a house would have been like calling the ocean a pond. The mansion sprawled across what had to be at least 20 acres, with manicured gardens, fountains, and outbuildings that were larger than most people's homes. The main residence looked like something from a European fairy tale, all stone towers and graceful arches. "This is where you live?" I asked Charlotte. She nodded like it was perfectly normal. "Want to see my room? It has a balcony that looks out over the stables." As we pulled up to the front entrance, staff members emerged to greet us. Not just a butler or housekeeper, but what appeared to be a small army of people, whose job was apparently to take care of the Wellington family. Marcus helped Charlotte out of the car, then offered me his hand. I hesitated before taking it, acutely aware of the contrast between his manicured fingers and my own worn hands. "Mrs. Patterson," he said as we walked toward the entrance, "before we go inside, I need you to understand something. What happened to Charlotte? What you did for her? It changes things. I don't know exactly how yet, but it does." I wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone made me think my 24 hours at the Wellington estate were going to be far more complicated than I'd anticipated. I had never imagined that taking a shower could feel like a religious experience. The guest suite Marcus had assigned me was larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with Damon. The bathroom alone was bigger than most bedrooms, with marble surfaces, gold fixtures, and a shower that had more buttons and settings than a spacecraft control panel. As hot water cascaded over me from what felt like a dozen different angles, I tried to process everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. After arriving at the estate, Marcus had disappeared into what I assumed was a series of important phone calls, while Charlotte gave me a tour of her wing of the house. Her bedroom was indeed enormous, with a canopy bed, a reading nook with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the stables she'd mentioned. "This is where I have tea parties when Daddy's home," she'd explained, showing me a small table set with delicate china cups. "Would you like to have one with me later?" "I'd love that, sweetheart." Charlotte's enthusiasm was infectious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I was a temporary guest, someone who'd helped during a crisis but would soon return to reality. The reality of the homeless shelter and my 7 remaining dollars. A soft knock on the bathroom door interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Patterson?" It was a woman's voice, unfamiliar but kind. "I'm Elizabeth, the house manager. I've left some clothes for you on the bed. They should fit reasonably well." "Thank you," I called back, though I hadn't asked for clothes. When I emerged from the shower, I found an outfit laid out that probably cost more than I'd made in a month at my old job. A soft cashmere sweater and pale blue, well-tailored slacks, and undergarments that still had price tags attached. Even the shoes were there, comfortable flats in exactly my size. How had they known my measurements? The answer came as I was getting dressed. Through the suite's windows, I could see a team of people working in the gardens below. Not gardeners, but men in suits who moved with the same precision as Agent Richards and his team. Marcus hadn't just brought me here for Charlotte's comfort. He really had been concerned about my safety, and that suggested resources far beyond what I'd initially realized. A gentle knock on the main door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Elizabeth entered with a warm smile. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying brown hair and the kind of efficient manner that suggested she'd been managing wealthy households for decades. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked, looking me over approvingly. "Much better, I imagine. The clothes are beautiful, but I can't accept them. I don't have any way to pay you back." Elizabeth's smile didn't waver. "They're a gift from Mr. Wellington. He specifically requested that you have everything you might need during your stay." "I'm only staying 24 hours. "Of course," Elizabeth agreed, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Mr. Wellington would like to see you in his study when you're ready. Charlotte is having her dinner, and then a bath. She's had quite an ordeal." The study was exactly what I would have expected from a man like Marcus Wellington. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and furniture that looked like it had been crafted by master artisans. Marcus himself sat behind a massive desk, still wearing his expensive suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked up when I entered, and something flickered in his expression. "You look rested." "I feel human again," I admitted. "Thank you for the clothes, but I can't accept them." "We'll discuss that later." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit. We need to talk." I settled into the chair, which was more comfortable than it looked. "About what?" "About you." Marcus leaned back, studying me with those intense eyes. "I had my people run the background check I mentioned. I know about the divorce, the medical bills, your husband's betrayal. I know about your business, what you sacrificed, and how you ended up at the shelter." Heat flooded my cheeks. The idea of strangers investigating my personal life, learning about my failures and humiliations, made me feel exposed and vulnerable. "You had no right." "I had every right," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "A stranger spent 3 days caring for my daughter in circumstances that could have been dangerous for both of them. I needed to know who you are." "And what did you conclude?" "That you're exactly who you appeared to be. A woman who has been dealt a series of terrible hands, but who still chose to help a frightened child with the last money she had." I didn't know what to say to that. Marcus leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Gretchen, I want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I need someone to help with Charlotte. Someone she trusts. Someone who understands what she's been through." He paused. "I travel frequently for business, sometimes for weeks at a time. Charlotte has nannies and tutors, but what she doesn't have is someone who genuinely cares about her well-being." "She has you." "When I'm here, yes, but I'm not here enough." There was pain in his voice, the guilt of a father who knew his work kept him away from his daughter. "What happened this week has made me realize that Charlotte needs more stability in her life, more consistency." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm offering you a position as Charlotte's companion. Not a nanny, she's too old for that, but someone who would be responsible for her emotional well-being when I'm traveling. Someone who would live here, be part of her daily life." I stared at him. "You want me to move in here?" "The position comes with a salary of $200,000 per year, plus complete benefits, housing, meals, and a generous expense account for anything Charlotte might need." $200,000. I tried to process that number. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. "Plus," Marcus continued, "there would be a signing bonus of $50,000 to help you get back on your feet." "This is insane," I said quietly. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm qualified to take care of a child. I know you spent 3 days protecting her when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. I know you gave her your last $20 when you were homeless yourself. I know she feels safe with you in a way she hasn't with anyone since her mother died. Her mother died? Marcus's expression grew distant. Cancer. When Charlotte was 5. It's just been the two of us ever since, and I haven't done nearly as good a job as I should have. I understood then. This wasn't just about hiring help. This was about a father who knew he was failing his daughter and had found someone who could fill a void he couldn't fill himself. Why me? I asked. You could hire anyone, someone with credentials, experience with wealthy families. Charlotte doesn't trust easily, Marcus said. She's been through too much, but she trusts you. That's worth more than any credentials. I thought about Charlotte's small hand in mine during the storm, the way she'd curled up against me in the gazebo, how she'd called me her guardian angel. I need time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. But before I could respond, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Wellington, but there's a situation at the front gate. Marcus frowned. What kind of situation? A man claiming to be Mrs. Patterson's husband. He's quite insistent about seeing her. My stomach dropped. Damon, you don't have to see him, Marcus said immediately. Security can remove him from the property. But I was already standing. No, I'll talk to him. I need to know what he wants. Marcus's expression hardened. Then, I'm coming with you. The front gate was a quarter mile from the main house, but we could hear Damon's voice even from that distance. He was shouting at the security guard, demanding to be let in, threatening to call the police. As our car approached, I could see him clearly for the first time since the divorce. He looked older, thinner, and there was something desperate about his posture that I'd never seen before. The moment he saw me, his whole demeanor changed. Gretchen! He rushed toward the car as I got out. Thank God I found you. What are you doing here, Damon? How did you even know where I was? It doesn't matter. I've been looking everywhere for you. He reached for my hands, but I stepped back. Gretchen, I've made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. What are you talking about? Sarah, the divorce, all of it. I was crazy, Gretchen. The cancer, the treatment. It affected my judgment. I wasn't thinking clearly. I became aware of Marcus standing slightly behind me, and of the security personnel positioned discreetly around us. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to have an audience. You seemed pretty clear when you asked for a divorce, I said. I was scared, Damon continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. Scared of dying, scared of being a burden. I thought if I pushed you away, it would be easier for everyone. By having an affair? Damon had the grace to look ashamed. That was a mistake, a huge mistake. Sarah, she took advantage of me when I was vulnerable. Took advantage? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Damon, you left me homeless. You threw away 42 years of marriage for a woman young enough to be your daughter. I know, he said desperately. And I've regretted it every single day since. Sarah left me, Gretchen. 2 weeks after the divorce was final, she took half of everything I had and moved to Florida with another man. So, that was it. Damon wasn't here because he missed me, or because he'd realized what he'd lost. He was here because his young girlfriend had taken him for everything he was worth. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. But it doesn't change anything between us. It changes everything. Damon stepped closer, ignoring Marcus's presence entirely. We can start over, Gretchen. We can get remarried, go back to the way things were. The way things were? I repeated. Damon, I sold my business to save your life. I sold our house. I gave up everything for you, and the moment you got better, you threw me away like garbage. I was wrong. You were selfish, I interrupted, and cruel, and you left me with nothing. But look at you now! Damon gestured at the mansion behind us. You've obviously landed on your feet. Found yourself a rich man to take care of you. The implication in his words, the casual assumption that I was some kind of gold digger, hit me like a physical blow. You don't know anything about my situation, I said quietly. I know you're not living in a shelter anymore. Damon's tone was becoming more aggressive. I know you're wearing clothes that cost more than most people make in a month. I know you've obviously moved on pretty quickly for a woman who claimed to love me. Claimed to love you? The words came out sharper than I intended. I gave you my entire life, Damon. I sacrificed my dreams, my security, my future for you, and you repaid me by abandoning me the moment it was convenient. People make mistakes, Gretchen. Some mistakes can't be forgiven. Marcus stepped forward then, his presence suddenly much more prominent. I think this conversation is over. Damon seemed to notice him for the first time. And who exactly are you? Someone who knows how to treat a good woman when he finds one, Marcus replied calmly. Damon's face flushed red. Gretchen, you can't seriously be choosing this stranger over your husband. Ex-husband, I corrected. And I'm not choosing anyone. I'm choosing myself for the first time in 42 years. You'll regret this, Damon said, his voice turning ugly. You're 65 years old, Gretchen. How long do you think this is going to last? What happens when he gets tired of you? That's enough, Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that made even Damon step back. But the damage was done. Damon's words had hit their target, awakening every insecurity I'd been trying to suppress. I was 65. I was a homeless woman who'd been rescued by a wealthy man 30 years younger than me. Maybe Damon was right. Maybe this was just temporary charity. I think you should leave now, I told Damon quietly. He studied my face for a long moment, perhaps hoping to see some sign that his words had worked. When he didn't find what he was looking for, his expression hardened. Fine, but don't come crawling back to me when this fantasy ends, Gretchen. I won't be there. He walked back to his car, a rusted Honda that looked even more pathetic next to the Rolls-Royce and the security vehicles. As his taillights disappeared down the drive, I stood there feeling like I'd been hollowed out inside. Are you all right? Marcus asked gently. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. I should probably go back to the shelter tomorrow. This was all a mistake. Was it? You heard what he said. I'm 65 years old. Charlotte needs someone young, energetic, someone who can keep up with her. Charlotte needs someone who cares about her, Marcus said. Age has nothing to do with that. But as we drove back to the house, I couldn't shake Damon's words. What happens when he gets tired of you? It was a question I didn't have an answer for, and one that would keep me awake most of the night. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Damon's voice. What happens when he gets tired of you? By dawn, I had made my decision. I would thank Marcus for his kindness, say goodbye to Charlotte, and return to the shelter where I belonged. But Charlotte had other plans. You can't leave, she announced when I joined her for breakfast in the sunny morning room overlooking the gardens. We haven't had our tea party yet. Sweetheart, I think it's time for me to go. Your daddy is here now. You're safe. Charlotte's face crumpled. But I don't want you to go. You're my guardian angel. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, his hair slightly disheveled and his usually perfect appearance more relaxed. Good morning, he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. I hope you slept well. I did. Thank you. The lie came easily. I was just telling Charlotte that I should be going today. Daddy, tell her she can't leave, Charlotte pleaded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Marcus sat down at the table, accepting the cup of coffee Elizabeth had poured for him. Actually, Gretchen, there's something we need to discuss before you make any decisions. What do you mean? I had a long conversation with Agent Richards last night. The investigation into Charlotte's kidnapping has revealed some disturbing information. My blood went cold. What kind of information? The men who took Charlotte weren't just after money or business secrets. They were specifically targeting my family because of certain government contracts my company holds. Contracts that involve national security. Charlotte had stopped crying and was listening with wide eyes. This was clearly news to her, too. What does that have to do with me? I asked. You've been seen with Charlotte. There are photographs of you together during those 3 days, taken by the kidnappers' associates before they were arrested. As far as anyone watching knows, you're important to my family now. The implications hit me like a truck. You're saying I'm in danger? I'm saying that leaving now, going back to the shelter, or trying to resume your old life would be extremely dangerous. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. I felt the walls closing in around me. So what are you suggesting? That I hide here forever? I'm suggesting that the job offer I made yesterday wasn't just a kindness. It was also the safest option for everyone involved. Charlotte reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Please stay, Gretchen. I'll be really good, I promise. We can have tea parties every day. I looked at this beautiful child who had already lost her mother and had nearly been lost herself, and felt my resolve wavering. I need some time to think, I said finally. Marcus nodded. Of course, but while you're thinking, there's something else you should know. Before he could continue, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway with an expression I hadn't seen before, barely controlled anger. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's another situation at the gate. Marcus's jaw tightened. The same man as yesterday? No, sir. This time it's a younger man claiming to be Mrs. Patterson's son. He's with the older gentleman from yesterday, and they're both quite agitated. My heart sank. Robert. Of course Damon would bring Robert. I don't have to see them, I said quickly. Actually, you do. Marcus's voice was calm but firm. If we don't deal with this now, they'll keep coming back. Better to handle it once and for all. 20 minutes later, I found myself facing both Damon and Robert at the front gate. My son looked uncomfortable but determined, while Damon appeared smugly confident, as if he'd brought reinforcements for a battle he was sure to win. Mom, Robert said the moment he saw me. Dad told me what happened yesterday. What you said to him. I told him the truth, I replied evenly. He made a mistake, Robert continued. People make mistakes, but that doesn't mean you abandon your family. The irony of those words coming from him, the son who had taken his father's side during the divorce without question, was almost laughable. Where were you when I needed my family, Robert? I asked quietly. When I was living in a shelter, where were you then? Robert had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't want to know. Damon stepped forward, clearly impatient with the emotional scene. Gretchen, let's cut through all this drama. I've spoken with a lawyer. Since our divorce isn't final yet, you're still legally my wife, which means you can't enter into any financial agreements without my consent. I stared at him in disbelief. What are you talking about? Our divorce was finalized months ago. Actually, it wasn't. Damon's smile was triumphant. There was a problem with the paperwork. A filing error. Technically, we're still married, which gives me certain rights regarding your decisions. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That's not possible. Check with your lawyer if you want. But I'm telling you the truth. Damon's voice became wheedling, manipulative. Look, Gretchen, I'm trying to save our marriage here. This whole situation is just you acting out because you're hurt. I understand that, but it's time to come home. Home to what? I asked. The apartment you share with Sarah? Sarah's gone, Robert interjected. Dad's alone, Mom. He needs you. He needs my money, I corrected. Just like before. That's when Marcus stepped forward. I hadn't even heard him approach, but suddenly he was there, and his presence changed everything. Gentlemen, he said in a voice that could have frozen fire. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Damon looked him up and down dismissively. And you are? Marcus Wellington, and I believe you're trespassing on my property. We're here to get my wife, Damon said, puffing up his chest in a pathetic display of dominance. Your wife? Marcus's eyebrow rose slightly. That's interesting, because according to the background check my legal team ran yesterday, your divorce from Mrs. Patterson was finalized 4 months ago. The color drained from Damon's face. There was an error. There was no error. Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. What there was, apparently, was an attempt to manipulate Mrs. Patterson with false information. Robert looked confused. Dad, you said. Your father lied, Marcus said simply, just as he's been lying about his reasons for wanting his ex-wife back. You don't know anything about our situation, Damon sputtered. Don't I? Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to something. Let's see. Damon Patterson, age 68, recently divorced. Lost approximately $80,000 to a fraudulent investment scheme promoted by his girlfriend, Sarah Morrison. Currently 3 months behind on rent for his apartment. Credit cards maxed out. Bank accounts overdrawn. With each word, Damon seemed to shrink a little more. So, you see, Marcus continued, I know exactly what this is about. This isn't a man who wants his wife back. This is a man who needs someone to bail him out of his financial problems. Robert was staring at his father with growing horror. Dad, is this true? Damon's face was red with humiliation and rage. Gretchen, you can't seriously believe I can believe it because it's exactly what you did during your cancer treatment, I said quietly. You used me then, just like you're trying to use me now. That's not. I was sick, Gretchen. I wasn't thinking clearly. And what's your excuse now? Damon had no answer for that. Marcus stepped closer, and I could see why Agent Richards and his team followed his orders without question. When Marcus Wellington wanted to be intimidating, he was terrifying. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. You're going to leave this property immediately. You're not going to contact Mrs. Patterson again. You're not going to harass her, threaten her, or attempt to manipulate her. If you do, you'll discover exactly how much influence a man with my resources can have over someone's life. You can't threaten me, Damon said, but his voice was shaking. I'm not threatening you. I'm making you a promise. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. Mrs. Patterson is under my protection now. That means she's untouchable. Do you understand? Damon understood. Whatever fight had been in him deflated completely. But Robert wasn't finished. Mom, please, don't let this man turn you against your own family. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. Robert, where were you when I was homeless? I didn't know. You knew exactly where I was. Your father told you. You chose not to care. It's not fair, isn't it? I stepped closer to him. When I called you after the divorce, what did you say? You said I should accept that your father had the right to be happy. You called me dramatic for objecting to his affair. You took his side without even hearing mine. Robert's face flushed. He's my father. And I'm your mother. But that didn't seem to matter when it was inconvenient for you. So that's it? Robert's voice was rising. You're choosing this stranger over your own family? I'm choosing myself, I said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what's best for me instead of sacrificing everything for people who don't appreciate it. You'll regret this, Damon said bitterly. Both of you will regret this. Marcus's expression didn't change. Are you threatening my family, Mr. Patterson? The word family hit me like a lightning bolt. Marcus had just referred to me as family. Because if you are, Marcus continued, I should mention that every word of this conversation is being recorded. Threatening the family of someone with government security clearance is a federal crime. That was the final blow. Damon and Robert left without another word, their heads down and their dignity in tatters. As their car disappeared down the drive, I felt like I'd just witnessed the end of a chapter of my life. Are you all right? Marcus asked gently. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I was. Did you mean it? What you said about family? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Charlotte lost her mother when she was 5. I've been trying to be both parents to her, but I've failed in a lot of ways. She needs stability, love, someone who puts her first. He turned to look at me directly. But it's more than that, Gretchen. In the 3 days you spent protecting her, Charlotte smiled more than she had in months. She laughed. She felt safe. You gave her something I hadn't been able to give her. What's that? A mother's love. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I can't replace her real mother, I said softly. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm asking you to be yourself. To be the woman who spent her last $20 on a frightened child. To be the person who made Charlotte feel safe when her whole world was falling apart. We stood there in the afternoon sunlight, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I allowed myself to imagine what it might be like. To wake up every morning in that beautiful guest suite, to have tea parties with Charlotte in her garden, to be part of a family that actually wanted me. The job offer still stands, Marcus said quietly. $200,000 a year, plus benefits, plus the signing bonus. But more than that, Gretchen, You'd be giving Charlotte something she's never really had, a stable, loving presence in her daily life. I thought about the shelter, about my 7 remaining dollars, about the loneliness that had become my constant companion. Then I thought about Charlotte's bright smile, her small hand in mine, the way she'd called me her guardian angel. Yes, I said before I could change my mind. Yes, I'll take the job. Marcus's smile was radiant. Charlotte's going to be over the moon. But as we walked back toward the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change more than just my living situation. It would change everything, in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. 2 years later, I stood in the same garden where Charlotte and I had shared our first tea party, watching her chase butterflies among the roses. At 10 years old, she had grown taller and more confident, but she still insisted on our daily tea time together. The transformation in both our lives had been remarkable, but not in ways I could have predicted. Marcus had been true to his word about everything. The salary, the benefits, the signing bonus, it had all materialized exactly as promised. But more importantly, he had kept his word about treating me as family. "Gretchen," Charlotte called from across the garden. "Come see, the blue butterfly is back." I made my way over to where she was crouched beside the lavender bushes, watching a magnificent blue morpho butterfly rest on the purple flowers. "She only comes here when she knows it's safe," Charlotte said softly. "Just like you did." The observation was so unexpectedly wise that it took my breath away. In 2 years, Charlotte had grown from a traumatized little girl into a thoughtful, compassionate child who saw the world with remarkable clarity. "You know what, sweetheart?" I said, settling beside her on the garden bench. "I think you're right. Our morning routine had become sacred to both of us. Breakfast together, then garden time, followed by her lessons with her tutors, while I managed the increasingly complex social calendar that came with being part of the Wellington household. Because that's what I had become, not just Charlotte's companion, but an integral part of their family. The change had been gradual. First, Marcus had started asking my opinion about Charlotte's education, her activities, her emotional needs. Then he'd begun including me in decisions about the household, the staff, even some aspects of his business travel. "What do you think about the Singapore trip?" he'd ask over dinner. 2 weeks is a long time to be away from Charlotte. "She's doing much better with separation anxiety," I'd respond. "But maybe we could arrange video calls at specific times each day?" Somewhere along the way, we had become natural. 6 months after I'd moved in, Marcus had surprised me with a new title and a significant raise. Head of Family Operations, he'd called it, with a salary of $300,000 per year. "I don't understand," I'd said when he explained the new position. "I'm already doing everything I was hired to do." "You're doing far more than that," he'd replied. "You're managing staff schedules, coordinating Charlotte's activities, handling social obligations, and making this house feel like a home instead of just a residence. That's worth recognizing." But the real recognition had come in smaller moments. The first time Charlotte had called me Gretchen Mom in front of her friends, the night she'd had a nightmare and had run to my room instead of her father's, the afternoon when Marcus had introduced me to a business associate as Charlotte's second mother and the person who keeps this family functioning. Each moment had built upon the others until I'd realized something profound. I wasn't just employed by the Wellingtons. I belonged to them, and they belonged to me. "Time for lessons," I reminded Charlotte as we made our way back toward the house. "Do I have to? Can't we just play in the garden all day? Education is important, young lady. Besides, don't you have that riding competition next month?" Charlotte's face lit up. "Oh, right. I need to practice my jumping." As we entered through the French doors that led to the morning room, I nearly collided with Elizabeth, who was carrying a silver tray with what appeared to be legal documents. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson, perfect timing. These just arrived for you." My heart skipped. Legal documents were never good news. "What are they?" "I'm not sure, but the messenger said they were urgent." I took the envelope with trembling hands, my mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Had someone challenged Marcus's authority to employ me? Was there some legal issue with my background check? But as I read the documents, my confusion only deepened. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, sensing my distress. I'm not sure I understand this, I said, reading through the legal language again. That's when Marcus appeared, still wearing his suit from his morning meetings, but with a smile that suggested he knew exactly what I was holding. Ah, he said casually. Those arrived. Marcus, what is this? He sat down across from me, his expression becoming more serious. It's an adoption proposal. An adoption proposal? I repeated stupidly. For Charlotte to legally adopt you as her grandmother. The words didn't compute. I don't understand. Charlotte bounced in her chair. We want to make it official. You're already my Gretchen mom. But Daddy says we can make it legal so you'll really be part of our family forever. I stared at the papers, then at Marcus, then at Charlotte. This isn't how adoption works. Children don't adopt adults. Actually, they can, Marcus said gently. It's called adult adoption, and it's more common than you might think. Charlotte would become your legal granddaughter, and you would become her legal grandmother. It doesn't change anything about our daily lives, but it makes the relationships official. But why? Marcus leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. Because in 2 years, you've become the most important person in Charlotte's life. Because when I travel now, I don't worry about her because I know you're here. Because this house isn't the same without you. And, Charlotte added with the matter-of-fact tone only children can manage, because we love you, and we want you to be stuck with us forever. Stuck with them. As if being part of this extraordinary family could ever be a burden. There's more, Marcus continued. He pulled out another set of documents. If you agree to the adoption, I'd also like to update my will to include you as Charlotte's guardian. Not just companion or caregiver, but her legal guardian if anything happens to me. The weight of what he was offering hit me like a physical blow. Legal guardianship meant that if something happened to Marcus, Charlotte would be mine to raise. It meant permanent security, permanent belonging, permanent family. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Say yes, Charlotte exclaimed. Please, Gretchen. I want you to be my real grandma. I looked at this beautiful child who had already lost one mother and had chosen me to fill that void. I thought about the scared little girl I'd found behind a dumpster 2 years ago, and the confident, loving child she'd become. Yes, I said, my voice breaking. Yes, absolutely yes. Charlotte launched herself into my arms with a squeal of delight that could probably be heard 3 counties away. There's one more thing, Marcus said as Charlotte finally settled down. A celebration is in order. I've planned a small party for this weekend. Nothing elaborate, just close friends and family. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. Family, he confirmed. The party that weekend was indeed small, but it felt enormous to me. Marcus had invited Agent Richards and his team, who had become something like extended family over the past 2 years. Elizabeth and the other staff members who had become dear friends, Charlotte's riding instructor, her favorite teacher, and 3 of her closest school friends. But the most meaningful moment came when we were gathered in the garden for the cake cutting. Charlotte stood on a chair to address our small group. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my new grandma, she announced with the confidence of a born public speaker. 2 years ago, Gretchen found me when I was lost and scared, but really, I think maybe I found her too. She needed a family as much as I did. As applause filled the garden, I felt tears streaming down my face. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Charlotte was asleep, I found myself in the study with Marcus, sharing a quiet drink and reflecting on the day. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found Charlotte that night? He asked. I considered the question. I'd probably still be at the shelter, or worse. And Charlotte would still be traumatized, still afraid to trust anyone. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Marcus, I said finally, why did you really do all this? The job, the adoption, the guardianship? Why? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, because in 42 years of marriage, no one ever loved you the way you deserved to be loved. Because you spent your entire life taking care of other people who took you for granted. Because when you had nothing, you still gave everything to protect my daughter. He looked directly at me then. Because Charlotte needs you. And I think maybe you need us too. I do need you, I admitted. Both of you. More than I ever imagined possible. 3 months after the adoption was finalized, I received an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth found me in the garden and announced that Robert was at the front gate, asking to see me. My first instinct was to refuse. I hadn't spoken to my son since that awful confrontation 2 years ago. But something in Elizabeth's expression suggested this visit was different. He looks different, she said carefully. Humbler. I found Robert standing beside a modest sedan, dressed in simple clothes that were a far cry from the expensive suits he used to favor. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Mom," he said quietly when he saw me. "Robert." We stood looking at each other for several awkward moments before he spoke again. "I came to apologize. I know it's too little, too late, but I needed to say it. I waited, not making this easy for him. I was wrong about everything. About Dad, about the divorce, about how I treated you. I was selfish and cruel, and I've regretted it every day since. What changed?" I asked. Robert looked down at his hands. "Dad came to me 6 months ago. He needed money, and I was the only family he had left. I gave him what I could, but it was never enough. He kept asking for more, making bigger and bigger demands. He looked up at me with eyes that held genuine remorse. I realized that's exactly what he'd done to you. Used you until there was nothing left, then discarded you when you couldn't give anymore. I tried to tell you that. I know. I should have listened." Robert's voice broke slightly. "I should have protected you instead of abandoning you." I felt my anger beginning to soften, replaced by sadness for the relationship we'd lost. "Robert, I appreciate the apology. I really do. But I can't just forget what happened. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see clearly now. What Dad did was unforgivable, and what I did was almost as bad." He reached into his car and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This was supposed to be your birthday present 3 years ago, the one I never gave you because I was angry about the divorce." I unwrapped it to find a small silver frame containing a photo from my 50th birthday party. Robert was perhaps 25 in the picture, his arm around me, both of us laughing at something his then-girlfriend had said. "I found it while cleaning out my apartment," he said. "I'm moving back to Denver, starting over. But I wanted you to have this, in case you ever want to remember when things were good between us." Looking at that photo, I remembered the son who used to call me every Sunday, who brought me flowers on Mother's Day, who had once told his friends I was the strongest woman he knew. "I'm glad you're starting over," I said sincerely. "I hope you find happiness. I hope I find peace," Robert replied. "I hope someday I can become the son you deserved." After he left, I stood in the garden for a long time, holding that photo and thinking about forgiveness, redemption, and second chances. That evening, Charlotte found me there. "You look sad, Gretchen Grandma," she said, using the new title she'd insisted on since the adoption. "Not sad, sweetheart, just thoughtful." "About what?" I showed her the photo. "About how sometimes people make terrible mistakes, but they can change if they really want to." Charlotte studied the picture seriously. "Is that your son? The one who was mean to you?" "Yes, but he apologized today. He said he was sorry for how he treated me. Do you forgive him?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, made me think. "I think I'm learning to," I said finally. Charlotte nodded sagely. "Daddy says forgiveness doesn't mean you have to trust someone again. It just means you stop letting their bad choices hurt you." Out of the mouths of babes. As we walked back to the house together, Charlotte's small hand in mine, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been a broken woman with nothing left to lose. I had spent my last $20 on a frightened child and thought I was making the final gesture of a failed life. But that gesture had led to this: a family that cherished me, a home where I was valued, a future full of love and purpose. Sometimes guardian angels, I realized, come to save themselves as much as the people they protect. And sometimes the very act of giving everything away is what finally brings you everything you never knew you needed. standing in the doorway of the mansion that was now truly my home. Watching Charlotte skip ahead to tell her father about our garden conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete and perfect peace. I was Gretchen Wellington now, grandmother to the most wonderful child in the world, and member of a family that had shown me what unconditional love really meant. At 67 years old, my real life had finally begun. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.